Hello, my name is Jim Raffle, and we're here for this episode of the Jim and Shelby Show, All Things Print podcast. I am joined, as always, by my friend and business partner.
Shelby Sapusik. I feel like we're getting a slow start today, Jim. That's
Yeah,
okay.
it's okay. I mean, it's a Wednesday, and it's the middle of the week, and we're going into the long holiday week, maybe for some people. So who knows? Um, we do have an interesting topic today, though. We're gonna go. This is the All Things Print podcast. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about a business issue. We've done this before. We just finished doing one of our quarterly webinars earlier this week, and those involve basically us presenting for a little less than an hour a topic related to our industry. And in this case, we did spot colors, and it's a free webinar to attend. And so we do sometimes get questions from people, not so much on the phone or email, but at trade shows and events like that, why do you do that? Is it worth doing it? And so we thought maybe we would just address that because it's something that anyone listening can use, we think, to help build their business, right? I mean, that's where I'm coming from today, at
Sure.
least.
Yeah.
I think they're actually incredibly successful. And the reason I think they're successful is I'm gonna take one step back and do a little bit of an explanation. I consider both webinars, this podcast, the email marketing you do, all the social media marketing that you do, I consider all of those what many people refer to as inbound marketing activities. And so what does that mean? It means we're trying to get people's eyeballs to notice us somewhere online and then somehow or another reach out to us for something we do, consulting services, selling equipment, selling software, whatever it might be, training, signing up for a training class. And so if you take another step back and look at the traditional sales model, the traditional sales model says that we buy lists and we get a salesperson, and that person pounds the phone all day long making cold calls. And then anytime someone's even is remotely interested, they put them on a follow-up list and they follow up with that person. And I've heard numbers anywhere between 5 and 7, we call them touches, between 5 and 7 touches before someone will go from being a a cold call who knows nothing about you to possibly purchasing what you do. And the problem is that that's incredibly time consuming, incredibly expensive these days to hire a salesperson. And I think really does not fit what we do professionally. I'm not saying it doesn't work for a lot of other businesses. I know people doing it very successfully. But I think what we do, people have to develop some trust and some understanding of us as people, and then, what our knowledge and expertise is. And so I look at webinars as a way to achieve many, maybe 90% of those touches before we actually talk to someone on the phone and turn them into a client slash customer. And so when and the reason I believe that's true is that quite often we'll start working with a new client, and you've been there when this happens. We'll start working with a new client and they'll say something along the lines of, well, yeah, I heard you guys talking about that in your podcast, or I saw your webinar and you were talking about that. And we're both kind of like, what? And the reason we're kind of like, what is that if you looked at the actual raw numbers, and these aren't secret, and you can go to YouTube and look at our views, although that doesn't really tell the whole story, but a typical webinar, we will get 50 to 70 people who sign up. About half of those, 25 to 35, will actually attend the event live. Later, we've only done 3 quarterly webinars, so we only have 3 quarters of data on the first one. But, they might be watched another 25, 50, 75 times, whatever it is. These are relatively small numbers. But we also only need 25 to 30 consulting clients a year to run a pretty darn successful business. And so if that's the case, then having 1 or 2% of the people who attend all of our online things become new customers is a big deal to us. And so I I view it as us avoiding the need for somebody doing full-time sales, which is incredibly costly. I mean, I know what a good salesperson who brings in the kind of volume that we're now generating would cost us. And it's not a small number, and here we are. I was thinking about this earlier this morning. We started this company in July of 2017, I believe. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's it, which means we're coming up on our 7th year of existence next month. And or maybe this month, depending when you're listening to this. And so I'm like, we've never had a salesperson. And we've grown this to be a pretty substantial company. And so um, we're on record, we're on pace to have a record year of sales. And I'm like, we're doing something right. And so that's, when you ask me, is a webinar successful? Yeah, because it's part of our overall marketing mix, which includes all those things I mentioned before. And I'll just try and run through them again real quickly. And then maybe you can address how you do some of those, right? So there's the webinars, obviously. There's the podcast, which is, I think, very high profile. There's email marketing, which is probably even more high profile to many of our customers and potential customers. There's social media marketing, which I know is high profile. But I think we did a podcast at some point on that we actually get people reaching out to us in private messages, specifically and most often on LinkedIn, and literally they become customers very quickly. And it's not because they just found me or you. They found us over, a long period of time, watching our feeds. And then I left one out. Well, I guess no, I guess in digital, that's probably all of it, right?
I think
Um,
so.
webinar, podcast, email, social. Yeah, that's probably it for the digital space. Yeah.
So when
So
I said I don't know, I guess I know what the webinars are supposed to do, but as you pointed out, we've only had three. And so when you ask me why do we do the webinars, I really don't know yet. I didn't, we don't really, I don't feel like have the metric. In my head, as the marketing person of this company, I want the webinars to bring in new customers who didn't know us before. But how do you do that? Because any way that we market the webinars are to people who already know us. So the only thing I can think of,
I need to stop you.
you mentioned,
Hold on, you need to stop you right there. Just I want to give you a metric because that's not true. We may only market to people who know us, but I think when we market to social, we're going beyond that. It, I just ran some numbers on the last webinar, and of the, I don't remember the exact numbers, a third, a third of the attendees did not show up anywhere else in our existing databases prior to the webinar. So your goal was achieved, and I just wanted to make sure I stopped you there, because you actually are succeeding at your goal, and this is new data. I just figured it
all right.
out last night, so you didn't know this
All right,
before.
well, so there you go. When you asked me, I don't know. I mean, I guess, I'd love to see that data, but I haven't seen it yet.
Mhm.
Wasn't aware of it until right now. But that would be my ultimate goal. And, I love having people who know us watching the webinars too, and for them to say, "Hey, I bought an instrument from you, and it's cool that you do these free educational, you know, sessions either through the webinar or through this podcast, so that we can use this instrument better, or whatever it might be, piece of software, whatever it might be." Uh, and while those things are valuable as well, I think the ultimate thing is for new people to come in so that because our meat and potatoes is consulting and training, we're not getting money by doing these webinars or these podcasts. That's not directly, not directly. I mean, we're not asking, most of the time, we're not asking people to pay to watch these things. So we
No.
need them to be kind of the way that we get our foot in the door, for some consulting and training work.
Well, I don't disagree with that because I think we probably invest conservatively $1,000 in every webinar we do. Now that's the vast majority that's in soft costs, in other words, your time and my time. But there's some of it got to allocate some of the costs of our Zoom license and things of that nature, our high speed
Sure.
internet, all that crazy stuff. But the I think the return on that investment is, and actually, so we had a situation with this last webinar where the way that we have people registered to avoid, for a couple of reasons. One, we want to avoid a phenomenon called Zoom bombers. So we make the registration process fairly rigorous. And in our case, we've chosen to do it through our e-commerce platform. And so you essentially, if you haven't done it, you sign up for a webinar. It's an event, so you get a ticket. The ticket has a zero cost, but you still have to go through our checkout, which means you have to put in your name, your address, And so some people outside of our trading area, which is, I think we allow people to purchase our products from the US, Canada, and maybe Mexico. I think that's as far as we go. And so we had people from Europe saying, we want to attend your webinar. And honestly, we don't mind if someone from Europe attends our webinar. We just know that they're not going to become a client, not directly, very unlikely. And so, when someone reaches out like that, we give them the sign up credentials. We don't mind doing that. The rest of the people, we've collected a good, there's been, in my opinion, there's been a very fair trade between that investment we make and the level of detail of information we get about the people who sign up. I mean, we know we don't just get their email address. We get their first name, we get their last name, we get their company name, we get their address, we get their company phone number. Now, do we use that other than the email address? Do we use that for active marketing? Nope, we actually don't. Where it might come into play is if they become a customer, we've already got that information and we know how to reach them. We also might use it for we sometimes do geographic marketing. So we might use their, in a very generic way, we might use their location as part of an email campaign. If we're holding a in-person training session in their region, we want to let those people know and not necessarily let people know halfway across the country that they can attend a one-day training session in New Jersey, right? So.
Another thing that you mentioned that made my ears perk up a little bit is you said we don't have a salesperson. I would argue that we do. I mean, I think what you do and what I do is partially sales. I mean, I mean, it has to be. I mean, if not, then how are we getting this work?
We aren't a dedicated sales
No,
team. So
that's true.
a
That's
dedicated
true.
salesperson would come and sit at their desk at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and they would either pound the phones or pound the email for 8 hours. I have friends who do it. They're very good at it. They make a lot of money doing it, but it's a very disciplined and rigorous for success. A lot of salespeople get a bad rap, but the ones who are really good at it are they're diligent, they're organized, they're their stick-to-itiveness is incredible because you have to sometimes get 20 and 30 no's over the course of the day to get one person who says, yeah, I'll take an appointment with you. And it can be that brutal. And so it takes a special kind of person to do it. I can't do it full time. I've tried it and it's not for me. It's quite frankly just a little bit too much rejection. And so we truly don't have a dedicated salesperson. What I do, if I do anything, I feel like what I do is two things. I do technical selling, so it's pre-sale, and we've already qualified the person, and I explain to them what we do. And over a great many of years, I've learned to do something that I always hated doing. And now I just do it almost intuitively, close the deal, right? Closing the deal is the hardest part of sales. It really, really is because it means you've got to ask that person to, especially in what we do. We're asking that person, in our case, to give us a 50% deposit on a very large, okay, I think it's large, on a very large amount of money in some cases. They've never worked with us. In many cases, they haven't even asked for references. Some do, but very few do, believe it or not. And so I feel like we get to that point and we succeed, and we have a very high success rate at that point. I've been in sales or around sales long enough, my entire life really, that I know that our success rate is incredibly high when it comes to closing. And I actually attribute a great deal of that to all of the social media, digital marketing, whatever you want to call it, webinars, podcast in particular. Those two are the big ones because in those two instances, the people get to see us and hear us and watch us interact. Um, you're not aware of it, but there's a deal I just closed yesterday. We almost were going together because he said, I've seen you and Shelby, or I've seen you and Shelby work together on your podcast and such, and how much extra would it be to have her? So in this case, it became a.
Wait, time out, time out. Did you say that you closed the deal and arranged for me to go
No,
somewhere and
no,
you
you
haven't
didn't.
told me
No, no,
about
he
it?
asked how much it
Oh,
was to add
okay.
you on. He chose not
I
to
see.
add you on. It was
I see. Okay,
already at,
okay.
they were already at the top end
Oh,
of
you
the.
didn't tell me.
No, no, no. But he asked about you without
Mhm,
me I didn't raise the issue. He raised it. He said,
mhm.
what about having, and I may have talked about it earlier in the sales cycle, but He asked about you coming and how much more that would be. And the original quote, he didn't want that. And so all of a sudden they wanted that, but they don't want to pay for it right now. And that's fine too. I mean, that happens. We
That
still close
happens.
the deal. We still close the deal. We still have a new client. Um, and they've never that particular client did ask for a reference, and the reference, oh, that's what happened. The reference just blew us up as a team in a good way. And so that's why they wanted us. So in that case, they did ask for a reference, and the reference went crazy, in a good way. And so yeah, I mean, so when we talk about not having a sales team, I just mean we don't have a dedicated sales team.
That's fair.
I mean, everybody in this company, even Jacob sells, right? I mean,
Of course. Yeah.
all
Mhm.
sell. And I think that's in most consulting firms, I think that's the way it should be. Smaller firms like ours, I think I think there's an argument that someday this company could become so big that it has a full-time salesperson. I can make that argument. We're just not there at this moment in time, and so it makes that online digital presence even more important. Um, the other
It's
thing.
funny, we started out talking about webinars and podcasts, and it's gone to sales and the need for sales, which is an interesting conversation too. It's this conversation has developed in a way I wasn't expecting.
They're directly related, right? I mean, so what I was going to say is another thing that a webinar, and it's you led right into what I was going to say. The other thing a webinar gives us is future content for social shares, right? And so um, we probably don't do it enough. We don't go back enough. We used to do it with our podcast. We don't go back enough and reshare old content. The thing is, the old content is there, and I can tell by looking at the statistics specifically on YouTube. I can tell that the old content is being consumed. We link to every version, every episode of this podcast and our webinars, which they're stored on YouTube. They're all linked to on our website. So if someone gets to our website and just starts poking around, it's not uncommon that they're going to watch 2 or 3 episodes of the podcast, or if they watch one webinar. Like, we picked up people in this week's webinar that had not seen the previous two. And I can tell you right now, looking at the statistics, some people have gone back and watched webinar 1 and webinar 2 since Monday when we did webinar 3. So this stuff all links together, and let's go back to the marketing touches, right? It all results in a marketing touch that we did not have to initiate. That's the real beauty of inbound marketing, right? I mean, inbound marketing is an overused term. It's been around about 15, 20 years now, but it works. It's this concept that I can initiate a marketing touch without initiating a marketing touch.
Mhm.
I don't have to, all I have to do is willfully create a webinar, right? And that's a significant amount of work, but it's a relatively small amount of work compared to the effort it would take to contact the 50 people who signed up for our last webinar, right? Because A, I'd have to find a list of 50 new prospects. B, I would
Mhm.
then have to either email them, and I'm not talking about mass emails. I'd have to create individual emails, which means I'd have to research their companies, or I'd have to pick up the phone. And I'm not going to, as a cold caller, and I've done it, I don't just pick up the phone and dial. I research that person. I look at their social media accounts and see what's going on in their life, not to be creepy, but I've learned that you don't, if you pick up their social media that they have a wedding coming up this coming weekend, it's a really bad week to call and market to them, right? They got other things going on. And so
Mhm.
by the time you do all that research and learn about them and their company, so when you pick up the phone, you know who you're talking to, it's time consuming. When I do dedicate, I haven't done it in a long time. I don't think I've done it since Colorcasters has existed, but for Color Metrics, I used to do it. I would dedicate whole weeks to sales. And in a good day, I would make 20 calls and get 1 or 2 people on the phone. That was a good day because that's the way I did it. I took the time and I dug deep. Um, and I remember in that company, there was the very first online meeting software like this it was a piece of software called WebEx.
Mhm.
WebEx cost us $400 per license per month
It's
when we
crazy.
signed up for it. And there was like a $2,500 startup fee. And we were financially a smaller company than Colorcasters is today, and we still did it. we still did it because it was so revolutionary and such a big time saver that I could all of a sudden start to have meetings face to face with people without having to get in the car and go anywhere. And then I figured out that you could actually have like 10 or 12. I think that used to be a small number. You could have 10 or 12 people in a meeting. And so we started to do things like webinars. They weren't really webinars yet. And this is going back, I don't even know how long WebEx has been around, but it was the very, very early days of WebEx. And we pay less than the cost of one seat for a month is our total annual cost for Zoom for the two of us.
Well, just think, well, I mean, think about how much more commonplace these conversations are, these, you know,
Thank you,
video
COVID.
calls, I guess. I'm sure that helped, but I mean, the technology was already there. It
Oh,
just that,
it
people
wasn't
started,
anywhere near as commonplace though.
that's true.
Yeah,
Well,
it was.
I
Yeah.
mean, people were working remotely and
Yeah.
missing family and friends and
I mean, you and I still do more. I mean, our weekly meeting is almost always a Zoom. Even if it's without video, we use the technology because it's convenient. If we have to share desktops, we can share desktops.
Mhm.
And
Right.
there's a lot that comes with that, and we are so far off topic now. But well, actually, not really. I mean, we did that in the webinar. So Zoom was our webinar platform, and Zoom isn't
Mhm.
technically a webinar platform, but our group size is small enough. We make it work, and that way we don't have to spend any extra money for a webinar platform. Um, the a big part of this week's webinar was sharing both my desktop to show a
Mhm.
piece of software and then using a specialized camera. So instead of seeing me, you got to see my desktop, my physical desktop with equipment on it, and me
That thing's
and
really cool, by the way, not because it's not showing you, but because it actually shows, yeah, you can really do a demonstration that doesn't, you're just not holding up your phone like this and the screen's hard to see. I mean, you could adjust your brightness. And I know you had to do that a couple times, but I was watching you do the demo and you could clearly see what you were doing and it was face down. I really like that camera. That's cool.
shout out to Chris Halford, the guy who developed Spec Check Mobile for us. His wife is in education, and so what that is that's a document camera. And so what it's
Hmm.
really meant for is educators. That's what it's built for. It's built for educators to be able to stand at either the front of the room or in a Zoom environment and put documents under it. You can adjust the height. I had it up as almost as high as it goes without stacking it up on top of things, which I've also done. Um, yeah, I use it when I do G7 expert training. I use it
Mhm.
because it allows me to get a top-down view of taking measurements with even an I1 IO. And I think that that's
Mhm.
really beneficial for people to be able to see it. I agree. So that's a tip, by the way. That's a great one. We're back on the webinar topic. That's a great tip that if you have something that's not all software, if you have a physical product to sell, take a look at something like a document camera. And the advantage of that is instead of trying to hold it up here and and then your soft focus and things come in, like you were playing around with before we started, right? The soft focus comes and goes and it's just harder to see. With a document camera, it's looking down and you can actually work with
Right.
your
I was playing around with this flower thing, it's just
which is funny now, but it's not funny if I'm holding up, my
No, I
calibration
know.
plaque for my
Yeah.
instrument and it keeps going in and out of focus and you like look at that. So half of it's in focus. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing you don't want. Whereas if I had a document camera and I turned off that background blur, you could clearly see. And if you're wondering what we're talking about, go watch the webinar.
Yeah.
But that's a great tip, right? I mean, because that's something we should be doing. Get yourself a document camera if you have any physical products you're going to be demonstrating. It's a much easier way to do it. Make
I'd
sure.
like to get one and do like what I do for Etsy,
Mhm.
do a video of that. That would be kind of fun. I'd
How about
probably have to stack it on top of things, but I could probably make it work.
yeah? Um, the other thing is make sure you have a good camera. Now, we both have relatively new MacBook products, and so we're both you're using your built-in camera, right?
Right now I am, yes.
So I'm using my built-in camera as well because I feel it's actually better than the external camera I had bought to work with my old Mac. And I have a really high quality external mic somewhere. I don't even know where it is. Um, I've switched away from that too, because I did some testing with both. And I feel like this is every bit as good, and it's just one less thing I have to hook up. So the newer
Mhm.
higher end equipment, and and I'm not, well, I am kind of a Mac person, but I use PCs too. I do find though that when it comes to built-in cameras and microphones, the Mac products blow away all but the high-end PCs, and that makes sense. If I have a
Mhm.
$500 no, if I have a $500 Dell notebook, I better not expect to have the same quality of camera and microphone that I have in a $1,500 or $2,000 Mac. I understand why the difference is there. I love that the difference is there because it means two less things I have to carry around when I travel, because we do these things when I'm on the road too. So. Yeah. All right. I think we're running out of stuff to talk about.
Sure. If you're looking for our webinars, you can go to colorcasters.com, go to training opportunities on the menu bar, and go down to the Jim and Shelby Show virtual training, and you will find our 3 quarterly webinars. And if you have an idea for our 4th quarterly webinar, we haven't decided upon it yet. It'll probably be sometime in September or October, I'm guessing, just based on time. But if you're interested in that, send me an email, shelby@colorcasters.com. We're looking for suggestions.
and so I just kind of to close it out. So to do the webinar successfully, you need a couple things. You need a webinar platform. Again, we're using Zoom. It doesn't have to be anything really complex. You need a way to sign up for the webinar. At least that's our recommendation. And I would make it a fairly robust, complex sign up, because you're making a big investment in time. I think it's not unreasonable to expect the person gives you back their information. And then of course use their information respectfully. Let's be honest. Don't be marketing jerks. You need a topic, obviously. That's a great point, Shelby. That's what made me think about that. You got to have a good topic. Take your time, settle on your topic. What you honestly don't need, once you've got a couple of these, the first one, I'm not true with your first one. Once you've got this under your belt, Shelby can confirm this, you don't need a whole lot of time. We planned our most recent webinar 2 weeks before we did it. So now it was on our calendar, it was on our radar, but we actually picked a date, I think a month ahead, and it was 2 weeks before we actually got it set up in the store and started marketing it. So it doesn't have to consume you. Once you've done a couple and you've got a little bit of an audience, your first one's going to be hard like anything. It's going to be hard. It's going to take time. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to make mistakes. But it can be something that after you've done it a little bit, you can kind of put it on autopilot, and it's not going to do itself, but you'll have done the work previously, and it'll go a lot faster. All right. Well, this is kind of a long episode for these days. I think we're
Sure.
going to wrap this one up. I have no idea what our next episode is, although I know we're having a meeting either after this one or tomorrow. And
Yep.
I think you have a calendar of events for podcasts, and I'm looking forward to hearing that myself. So with that, we will say goodbye.
All right. Thank you.